Call the meeting to order. Welcome one and all to the May 9 regular meeting of the Trinity County Planning Commission. I'm going to have to remind us all to pay attention to our microphones so all can hear. The first order of business will be public comment. The members of the public may address the Planning Commission concerning matters within our jurisdiction which are not listed on the agenda, and to request that the matter be agendized for a future meeting. No action may be taken on these matters at this meeting. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment? Please step forward.
I'll be as brief as I can. I know there's a 3-minute limit, and what I had to share tonight has changed a little bit from my original draft. My name is Tom Sanders, and I live at 180 Go Away, which is about 8 miles north of Weaverville and right off Highway 3. And on Go Away, Buttons Road, and First Left Road, if you looked at a parcel map, you would see that all of our properties are connected with common property lines.
Mr. Sanders, are you making comment about the item on the agenda tonight?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we'll have a public comment period for that.
Okay.
When we open the item up.
Okay, so this is just like...
This is general comments about anything that you'd like the Planning Commission to consider in the future, or...
My misunderstanding.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take off my 3 minutes, I hope not.
No, you get that back.
Veronica Kelly-Albies, Douglas City. I wanted to reach out again. I put in a complaint about a water tank that should be on a property out near us. I have not heard anything about it, not seen anything there. They're supposed to be for fire suppression, an elevated water tank on the AmeriGas property, and it's not there. And we're all high risk for fire. But I did what was asked of me, and I've heard nothing and I've seen nothing, and that was well over a month ago. So I would just like to see if that ever comes up in front of you guys. Who's handling enforcement? Just like to know where it goes so it doesn't die. Thank you.
I have a question for you. This tank, you believe, is there due to a use permit condition?
It's not there. The cut that they received many years ago required that they put an elevated water tank on the property because there's no well there for fire suppression, and there is no indication that there's any kind of water tank or water suppression availability there.
Okay. Is there anyone else? Okay. We will close public comment and move on to the agenda. There are no minutes to review tonight or approve. There's no old business to look at. That brings us to new business. And the one and only item on the agenda, which is item number 4. This is an appeal of the planning director's decision to issue a commercial cannabis cultivation license for APN 010-680-07, located on First Left Road, Weaverville. The applicant is Cook, and the appellant is Roadhouse.
Good evening, Commissioners. The goal of this meeting this evening for this item, is to have you clarify the performance standards from the cultivation ordinance. Staff has interpreted what constitutes compliance a certain way, and we want to make sure that that's acknowledged in an open forum. A few things about the site, the subject site. It's off First Left Road, like you said. This is north of Weaverville, off of Trinity Dam Boulevard. It's a 15-acre parcel. It's zoned unclassified. The general plan designation is rural residential. This site has been licensed with the county since 2018. We did receive comments after the agenda packets went out. We did receive comments from people off of First Left Road and from people on Rush Creek, in Rush Creek Estates. The comments were received from people anywhere from 1,000 to 1,500 feet away from the site. The planning department, as we're sending out notices prior to issuing licenses, we've sent out roughly 2,000 letters to adjacent landowners. And we get comments back from people frequently that fall into the compliance category. And the expectation is not at all to have you be the compliance police. You know, we feel like we have code compliance specialists. We have 3 of them in the cannabis division. And so we don't want you to have that role. However, if we have something that kind of falls into a gray area, we would like you to confirm that we are seeing things clearly as we are deciding, making a discretionary call on what we think constitutes compliance. Okay? We received this appeal on April 3rd from Mr. Roadhouse, and he is here this evening. Both the applicant and the appellant are here this evening. We received the appeal on April 3rd, and that was a response to a public notice that was in the Trinity Journal and adjacent landowner notices that were sent out at the end of March. Okay? So we identified that the site would receive a Class 1 categorical exemption. David Colbeck will we'll kind of size up that situation for you in a minute. We'd like to make sure that you do recognize that staff frequently makes discretionary calls on issuing these licenses and determining what is compliance. There were two issues listed on the appeal form. One of them was that the hoop houses on site had been on site for longer than 180 days. And the second complaint was that they've been hauling water. So regarding the first issue, the hoop houses are not hoop houses, they are permitted greenhouses. And regarding the second issue, the hauling water, we did check in with the applicant, and yes, they have hauled water. They have a shared system, both their water source and their water storage on site is shared between their house and their cannabis cultivation. So that brought a little ambiguity into the situation. Staff feels after looking at this, that the easiest solution is really to increase their storage. We did go out and witness that well tests were done. They were 4-hour well tests. We had staff from environmental health and staff code compliance specialists that went out for the last hour and a half of those tests to witness the tests. And they did produce what is a threshold that we have. It's not written anywhere, but environmental health can speak to the threshold that generally we follow, which is 3 gallons per minute, that we need to have a water source on site that can yield 3 gallons per minute. There were a couple questions that came up also about why commercial water hauling wasn't ever allowed in the first place. And so I did reach out, spoke with the ad hoc. I was not in the seat at the time that the urgency ordinance was hatched. But part of the issue with not wanting to have water hauling be an acceptable way for somebody to bring water into their cultivation site, really some of that was based on the impact that water trucks would have on roads, tearing up road surfaces and creating a lot of dust and noise as well. The state allows it, but our ordinance does not. So in this case, we feel like we can see that there could be a very easy pathway to compliance. But again, because there's some gray area with this, we want to make sure that that's vetted openly. Environmental Health Director Christy Anderson is here, and if you have questions regarding water, she can speak to that. And like I said, David Colbeck will size up the categorical exemption for you.
Would you like me to speak to that now?
Yes, please. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, apologize.
3 lashes for that. I'm trying to think the best way to do this, because you're going to come back to asking us about the question you asked about the gray area of the ordinance. And I'm thinking it might be efficient to deal with that issue, that topic, and that once we have the context of that, then deal with the appeal, which would be the CEQA, the hoop house, and the hauling at this particular site. Are you okay with that?
That's
Commissioners,
fine.
does that make sense? So why don't you speak to the question you have about, that's right at the end of your staff report, about what section of the ordinance are you asking us to weigh in on, and what is the issue?
The issue comes down to, in the cultivation ordinance, in the performance standards, it says you need to have an on-site water source. Commercial water hauling is only allowed in emergencies and defines emergencies as an unexpected occurrence. We did confirm with the applicants that they did haul water during power outages last year when the car fire had a couple weeks of, they were without power for a couple of weeks. So that was the case during part of that time. But the ambiguity for us is that if somebody is hauling water and it's used at the home, does that mean that they are automatically out of compliance with the cannabis ordinance because that water is also used on the cannabis cultivation site? We think the easiest way to handle it is just to make sure that you have enough storage to where you're not going to need to haul water.
Do you all understand the issue? I have a couple questions. Is that all? Have any questions for staff on the question we've been asked?
Not any questions, but just, are we doing comments now?
Well, I think the way I think would be effective to do this is we'll have one public comment period. So what I'd like to do is get this question out and clear in terms of staff report and questions on the staff report. Then we'll go through the appeal, same drill, questions of the staff, and then as our normal sequence, then we'll open it to the public on the entire
And
set of matters. Then we'll come back for discussions and motions. If that makes sense to the commission.
I do have a question. So why you listed in the staff report the possibility of two different storage options or meters or whatever. One for the cannabis operation and the other for the home. But it sounds like you are recommending increased storage as opposed to the other. Is that correct? On an overall basis and not ever considering the other?
Correct.
Okay.
It seems like it's the most straightforward solution, is to increase storage. If somebody's, the way that they have their system plumbed, it might be difficult to separate those uses. That's an option though. I put out the staff recommendation was the one that we identified as kind of being the simplest solution to circumvent the whole situation.
And in that model,
Yeah.
in that model, were you, is the inference I'm taking correct that all storage is filled from wells? There's no hauling in the model you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about. I'm saying that the 55,000 gallons, and in this case, that's based in part because the applicant had been thinking about increasing their storage. The 55,000 gallons that's specifically proposed here as the staff recommendation is based on what this applicant, in part, we wanted them to come up with a solution. We said, hey, what are you gonna do here? They had planned to purchase that much storage. So, does that answer your question?
Well, I guess we're mixing the current case with the principle of what you
Yes.
want the ordinance to mean. So in this case, there are wells
Yes.
that could fill more tanks that would cover the domestic situation. But if there were, if this cultivation site were on a full section of land and the cultivation site was 1.5 miles from the house, are you suggesting that they need to put wells in for cultivation and they could or could not haul for the house separately? I'm trying to understand in the general case, you don't want any hauling for cultivation. hauling for domestic use is okay, and, excuse me, how do we keep that separate? This case makes sense, put a bigger tank and pump it on all the wells, but that's not the general case.
Can I elaborate a little
Please.
bit? So basically, people have to either prove that they have a well on site that produces adequate amount of water, or a surface water diversion. In this case, their only choice was well water. The reason a lot of the ambiguity comes up with water trucks and water hauling is not just purely because of the roads, but the state only permits potable water trucks and potable water haulers, and I think we're down to 1 or 2 now in Trinity County. However, I'm sure most of you, well, at least some of you that live on 36 can say that there's hundreds of water trucks in Trinity County. Now, non-potable water trucks that have not been certified with the state, we don't know where they're drafting their water from, where they're taking it to, how they're doing it, if they're even licensed to drive a vehicle, which we have found is not the case a lot of times, or they're not even plated right. I mean, that's a whole nother topic, but it really comes down to, it's a whole mess of problems when it comes to something that's not permitted and driving around the county and taking water from one area to another. I think that has a lot to do with it, besides the roads, besides all of the other issues that we see.
I think you're addressing why there's a prohibition on,
Water.
that's not the point I'm getting, except that the ordinance is the ordinance. And we're trying to understand, so they can't haul water for cultivation. Okay. I'm trying to come up with this case where they need to haul, so one thing we could say is you can never haul water if you're in cultivation business. You must pump your domestic out of, which is kind of what you're suggesting in this case. You must pump domestic out of a well. And if that means you have to have a big tank because you're pumping 24/7, you got to store it up. Okay, that's the suggestion I see in here for the present case. If there is a case where there's adequate well potential for cultivation, but not also for domestic, are you also considering a case where they could haul water for domestic, but not for
If they were
cultivation?
separately metered.
If they were separately metered, separately managed, and somehow you're convinced that that's truly kept separate?
So, just to kind of separate it from the state perspective, only potable water haulers can haul water to a house or household. I'm sorry, I kind of glazed over that because.
Well, so let's say we're talking about a licensed certified potable water hauler hauling to the house.
Hauling to the house for domestic purposes.
Yes.
Only.
Yeah, and that's basically where I was at, is that it seems to me that what I heard you say is that you are always going to recommend that they increase their storage and never recommend that they split them. It seems to me that sometimes splitting them might be a good choice.
Not quite. I will never say never, just because there may be some unique situation, but I'm saying in general, we see that this would be the best solution. The only way, if you wanted to have hauling for domestic purposes and you need to have an on-site water source for your cultivation, yes, you could do that, but you better make sure they are clearly
Right.
separated. And we really don't want to create a compliance issue that would be difficult to nail down. With increasing the storage, it's easier from a compliance standpoint.
Your report uses the term metering them separately. Do you meter the water going into a domestic water tank? Do they have to show how much was purchased and it has to be a reasonable usage level for a domestic situation?
It's not required yet.
It could be to
But it could
comply
be.
with this,
There
if
you
we
go.
add something, okay. Okay, I think I understand the issue. We're in the questions of staff period here. Any other questions for staff? Then, sorry.
I mean, I have a lot of different issues, but, I think the water issue is very large. We've heard from people in the past, Mark Lancaster has made presentations to the Planning Commission about critical water overlays in certain watersheds, and, there's those kind of issues when you have water-intensive new uses that threaten the existing water rights of existing residents. I think that's an issue that we need to think about in these scenarios. It's not just water storage but there's some bigger issues relating to water that we need to grapple with at some point.
But do those issues, at some point, do those issues relate to whether or not you should be issued a well permit in the first place because you're impacting the water table? Surface water diversions affecting downstream is a different issue entirely. It's an issue, but I think it's different than what we're talking about here.
So that's one sort of overarching issue that I think we need to address as a commission at some point.
Okay.
We need to deal with that. But also the staff report mentioned rain catchment, but that hasn't really been brought up. Does the county allow rain catchment for commercial cannabis or for domestic use?
We have no limitations on rain catchment that I'm aware of.
No, and we have several people in the program that aggressively use rain catchment.
Sure.
Okay, but I think the question we're being asked, since the ordinance speaks to hauling water, is how can we help you interpret the intent there? All these other issues are valid issues, but the question we're being asked is hauling water for cultivation getting mixed with domestic scenarios.
But the water issue is such that I personally believe that the uses should be separate and metered.
Okay.
Because I think that.
Now we're getting into discussion. Hold on thought.
Okay. As opposed to questions. Yeah.
Any other questions for staff on this one? Otherwise, we'll move on to the appeal discussion. All right. Let's go back to the appeal. Now that we understand the issue, your concern you have with this particular issue of hauling, we know you have a recommendation how to address the water in this case, the issue of hauling in this case. The appeal itself, you mentioned that there were two specific items in the appeal, and then the CEQA. We can look at the CEQA that's listed as the purpose. Those are the subjects of the appeal.
The appeal did not specifically say, I have an issue with this CEQA determination. The appeal specifically listed the two items. As Commissioner Matthews said, the water issue makes you think a little bit more about that, but the way that we as staff approached this was that, we get the appeal form, we read it, there are two things listed on it, and we say, okay, what are we going to do about this? What types of issues are these? Are these compliance issues? Is this challenging the CEQA determination, or does it fall into some other category that maybe council can give guidance regarding, or it's just going to be an other issue? So far, the vast majority of what we've been dealing with have been compliance issues, and that's the way that we saw this one, but with that ambiguity regarding the water hauling, we thought, okay, let's be prudent. Let's put it out there and let everybody see the way that staff goes through making decisions about determining how we think somebody is compliant.
Okay,
If I may, Mr. Chair.
please.
So ultimately on this appeal, there's two discretionary actions that have been taken by staff. One is there was an issue with hoop houses. Staff has reviewed those hoop houses and has, in your report, noted that there are no unpermitted structures and that those structures are permitted structures. The second issue is where you get into the CEQA, and staff has, in their discretion, mitigated the CEQA issue of hauling by increasing the storage. So what's before you today are those two discretionary acts, and whether you think you should uphold staff's discretionary mitigation of those two factors, or whether you want to direct staff to do something different than what has been done.
Well, I actually find that confusing. What staff did was a class 1 category exemption. That's not a CEQA study. That doesn't require mitigations. It's none of that. It's that they have a mitigation in place for a compliance issue, which was hauling water for cultivation.
Correct.
However, the CEQA was a discretionary action of the director as well.
And an exemption is also a discretionary act.
And the issue of the discretion, issue of an exemption is discretionary. Okay, so, okay, I think you were about to have David brief us on that part. Brief away, David.
See if I can walk my way through this. David Colbeck, DOT, Environmental Compliance Specialist. So for the past 5 months, we have been...
Louder, please.
Thank you. Somebody had to say that. I know I have a soft-speaking voice. Is that better? Yes. So for the past 5 months, we have been going through a process of reviewing each application for renewal. And it has been, they have been prioritized either based on the state license renewal deadline or the county. And as we have worked through our spreadsheets and prioritized which ones to address first, we have conducted, I have conducted a staff review for my part using GIS, doing a geospatial analysis of each location. I have selected about 25, 30 factors to look at, again, for each location, set the boundaries and the perimeter for each location for any potential impacts, and assessed if, one of two things. Does it qualify for a categorical exemption for CEQA for a Class 1 existing facility? If I'm not sure it does, then we push it through to a provisional process, an additional staff review, where it goes to the planning department, and planning staff will then assess whether they require more information to understand what is happening on the site, or if there's any potential mitigations that need to be put into place. In either case, a license is issued to that operation, with the understanding that with the CEQA, CE, there are certain limitations on how that operation can function. For the provisional license that requires more additional staff review, that can include everything from site visits to, again, mitigations for density issues, cumulative impacts, roads, hydrology, odor. There are a number of factors that any individual license that is going through that additional review process may have to address. So for the CEQA, the categorical exemption process, we have decided to make use of the Class 1 exemption for existing facilities, which allows for, it consists of the operation, repair, maintenance, permitting, leasing, licensing, or minor alteration of existing public or private structures, facilities, mechanical equipment, or topographical features involving negligible or no expansion of use beyond that existing at the time of the lead agency's determination. So at the time that we're making a determination, it is based on the existing function of that cannabis cultivation location. It is that the operation of that facility that we are interested in. And it is the understanding and how the CE is actually drafted in the project description of that cultivation location is that they are not going to change their facility. There's going to be no substantial expansion. Because there's no substantial expansion, then we have decided that there would be minimal or negligible or minor, if any, environmental impacts in the operation of that facility for the 1-year period that the license is in effect. So that's kind of a crude overview. We have issued, at this point, I maybe don't want to give too many numbers, but we have gone through nearly 2/3 of the 330 roughly licenses that are looking to be renewed. And again, those are prioritized either on the timeline of the state or the county renewal process deadline. We still have several more to go through, of course. Once the CE determination is made, it is posted in the paper, it's publicly noticed, which allows for a 10-day period for that to be appealed. After that point, then it essentially becomes effective when it is posted at the clerk's office. It is posted for a month, which allows for statute of limitations to proceed, where it can be sued if somebody has standing to do so, and only if someone has standing to do so, after any administrative option is exhausted, such as this appeal process here. The state is requiring us to provide them with those CEs to show that we are applying some discretionary review of each individual license. So with that, any further questions?
Mr. Chairman, and just standing by if you would like to call in for any more in-depth discussion of the CEQA issue.
Okay, as you might imagine, I do have a couple questions. I guess this is a question for council, but, and I don't want to run down a rabbit hole on this one, but the class 1 categorical exemption talks about, as you read off, operation, repair, et cetera, of private structures, facilities, mechanical equipment, topographical features. And then it goes on to give 16 examples, none of which include agriculture. So the application of it to agriculture I find curious. You also mentioned cumulative impact. And in the CEQA guidelines section of Title 14, it talks about exceptions to issuing CEs. And the second one is cumulative impact, which you mentioned. I am certain you're not going to take the position that you're looking at the cumulative impact on the site itself. The site's affecting on its own site. Therefore, the implication is the cumulative impact across sites. What is the cumulative impact of, I think you said 2/3 of 300, 200 CEs from a CEQA standpoint? Has that been addressed anywhere at any time? Here's my question.
To your first point, if I could, yes, there are a number of examples under the Class 1 exemption. It is understood that those are guidelines. It even says in there that it's not an exhaustive list of the ways that a Class 1 can be applied. And throughout all of the exemptions, through I believe 30 different classes of exemptions, it is understood that there are variations that can exist within that classification. That's also true of Appendix G, an idea that it is not an exhaustive list. And that I don't mean to get into the nomenclature, but I believe you understand what I mean. Is the idea that if you're conducting an initial study, what should you look at? What should CEQA be concerned with? Appendix G is a list of factors, 18 factors, 19, that says this is what you should look at. And they give checkboxes basically of what is important and what is not. Not what is not, but what is applicable and what is not. So for those examples, I understand that maybe none of them, as they were written, apply specifically to agriculture, but our stance was that for these facilities, and we will call them facilities because they're essentially functioning as an agricultural facility, different than a structure, but has a footprint on the landscape, that it was applicable to use the Class 1. For cumulative impacts, yes, that argument has been addressed with our council. The notion of whether cumulative impacts is related to a single operation over a multitude of years, or if it's related to a number of operations within 1 year. For cumulative impacts, yes, there are quite a few CEs that we're looking at producing or have produced. Again, we are using quite a bit of discretion, and I can't give you an exact percentage of which have gone to additional staff review and which have gone directly to CEs, but it is not all of them that we measure is being stamped with the CE. So for cumulative impacts, yes, there's quite a number of CEs, but you have to understand that the cultivation sites are spread out all over the county. And so our determination for our initial review of whether a particular applicant would qualify for a CE is related to where they are within the watershed and what density of cultivation activities exist around them, which are licensed activities. So with a discretionary threshold applied of 10 cultivation sites within a single sub-watershed, then we felt that was something that would require further review. And there's a number of locations around the county where that is true. We've also taken measures to use watershed hydrological units, basically. HUC 12s is what it's called. It's a basic standard, say, in natural resource conservation, to use a small watershed delineation. We have gone beyond that to actually make sub-watersheds, to actually try to define areas that are smaller than HUC 12s that would allow us to really focus on areas of potential cumulative impact. And where we feel that it's appropriate, then we have not allowed CEs to move forward for those areas that have high density of cultivation activities.
And what did happen in those areas?
They would be pushed to the additional staff review process. And so what
Any of those resulted in initial studies?
that is a potential. We have had a flow chart that has been available on the planning department website for several months now, I believe, that has outlined the process that we are pursuing. And one half of that flow chart is after our initial discretionary review. And may I speak a little bit more detail? When I go through and I'm looking at these for their applicability for the CE, that is reviewed by several other staff members within the planning department. And it is a process of negotiation. Where I might be looking at one scale, they will be looking at individual files, individual cultivation license files to see, to verify what I'm seeing and to bring up other points that I wasn't seeing. So I just want to stress that it is definitely an exchange and it is a process for each of these licenses, license renewal. CDFA has also, I think I lost my train of thought for a moment there. CDFA, Cal Cannabis, recognizes the use of several classifications for renewing cannabis licenses. And Class 1 is one that they have put a memo out that we have reviewed that has some guidance about what is applicable and not applicable for the use of the Class 1 CEs. They have also talked about Class 4s and several other classifications, which Class 4 would be a minor alteration to the landscape, which does allow some minor changes to land with some caveats where there are certain exceptions that need to be applied to a Class 4 that do not have to be applied to a Class 1. I don't mean to, again, get too detailed, but I feel like I missed a question that you would ask.
No, I think you got it. Okay. Any other questions? All right, have we vetted we've done the appeal? We've talked about, do you have any more questions about the water hauling aspect of the appeal itself? So, to be clear on that, water hauling has been happening. As a result of the ordinance requiring no hauling, was that what caused 3 wells to be put in, or were they already there, or what's the story on the wells?
Christie, do you want to speak to this?
I mean, was that a solution to, was that the mitigation? They put wells in, or the wells were there?
It's my understanding of looking through the well permits that they were there previously.
Okay. Okay, so wells were in place. Subsequent to the processing of the license, so the license was noticed on March 27th, the approval was noticed, excuse me, on March 27th, which triggered an appeal, timely appeal. On March 27th, these wells were in place, and subsequently, they were proved to be meeting your requirement of 3 gallons a minute.
Yes. We actually required additional testing to make sure that those guidelines were met.
To prove that, okay. Was water hauling, since the wells were already in place, was water hauling occurring? You probably answered this earlier, but was water hauling all for the domestic use already happening before?
Yes.
Okay, so the wells were inadequate for domestic use?
The wells were, excuse me, the wells were inadequate for domestic use and cannabis. The applicants, I did ask because I want as much background, of course, from them as we can get. They didn't, their history of water consumption on site has not been exclusively for domestic use. It's been a combined use since they've been there, from the way that I understand that.
Okay.
If I can. So, you said that one of the time periods in which they were hauling water was when they, during the fires, when they had no electricity, so their pump wasn't working, so they weren't getting any water from the wells. And so that would be considered an emergency use of hauled water, correct?
Correct.
Just making sure.
So I guess I have a question about the well test. Is that appropriate at this point?
Sure, if it's in the report, you can ask about that.
I mean, testing well production in April is, doesn't mean very much to the dry part of the year. So I guess I'm, what are the department's standards when you test, when you do a production well test? I
So
mean, April is very different than October.
I agree
Water
in certain
capabilities.
wells. So when this standard came into effect, it was basically so we could hold a consistent standard across all.
Louder, please.
We wanted a consistent number to, we wanted to hold a consistent standard to every cannabis cultivator. And that was done through a series of calculations and previous, like a subdivision ordinance, for instance, usable water rate recovery was 3 gallons per minute. Now, we did not require a test during a certain time of year because it really depends on the well. We only have a true aquifer under the Hayfork Valley proper. So everywhere else is a fractured rock formation that holds pockets of water, and it really is hit or miss here in Trinity County. Now, if they were close to a stream or creek, we could see some kind of influence from that, or if historically the data showed that they had high groundwater in that area. We could see that there would be a water table that could be impacted due to rain or wet weather events. So this was a discretionary decision based on those facts. Did that answer the question?
That's how you look at it.
But nevertheless, even if the wells dry up in October, if they have not stored enough water, there's no water. So they need to be storing in case the wells aren't producing in October or until the next rainy season. Is that your view of it?
Yes, and actually, some of the state water board regulations do require storing of water during the wet season and using it during the dry season,
For other than surface water?
other than surface water. Now, I think the question that you're asking is, well, okay, I'll let you ask, but basically, I don't see the time of year in April and them being on the top of the ridge where they are with no surface water around and historically not a high surface groundwater level, then I did not see that as a factor. And a lot of our wells in Trinity County, unless they are close to the river, are 200 to 300 feet on average in depth.
I mean, just in my own personal case, we get far less water out of our irrigation well, which is down along a little tributary on Browns Ranch Road in the fall. And, you know, it'll break suction and it'll pump, 200 gallons a day or whatever. Whereas this time of year, it'll produce as much water as I want. So, I mean, there's a huge difference in the ability of a well, even in a non-aquifer.
And you are down over 60 feet, right? Okay, let's not go there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Sure.
like you mentioned, there is a tributary on your property, and there is a direct correlation between the distance to a tributary and well production and its impacts on that stream.
And well depth requirements.
Yeah.
So I guess another question that I have is fire water storage. If we're talking about sort of a generic, many residences have requirements for water storage for fire purposes. How does this storage for cannabis, for domestic, for fire play? I mean, is it all combined then? I mean, is it
Yes, it
just
has
one-
been.
Just one big pot?
Yeah, that's it, it has
So
been.
to speak.
The applicants at this site, matter of fact, they did haul water also during the time period before the power was out, from my understanding. They hauled water too, because the fire was making everybody pretty nervous, and then they topped off their tanks because they wanted to have fire water on site. So at this point, there's no delineation between uses for water storage.
Okay. Good.
So I guess, how did you arrive at the 55,000 gallons?
I tried to address that earlier, maybe I didn't make it clear. That was somewhat arbitrary. We spoke with the applicants and said, hey, you know, if you're doing this, you can't haul water. This is not, you can't do this. So they brought it to the table and said, well, we are planning on increasing our storage. We've already purchased 10 5,000 gallon tanks, and they already had 5,000 gallons of storage on site. So in this case, add them up, and we said, okay, 55,000 gallons, that's approximately 3 times what their highest monthly water diversion would be. As part of your cannabis reporting, you need to estimate how much water you're diverting, whether it's from groundwater or surface water diversion. The state, the water board, requires you to report what your diversion is on a monthly basis. And so their highest month was 15,000, and the 55,000 gallons, I'm not sure where the applicants decided that they wanted 55,000 gallons of storage, but we looked at their water diversion that they've been reporting consistently for the last couple of years, and like I said, it was it's over 3 times what they would divert on a monthly basis between what we estimate the domestic use would be in addition to their cannabis diversion. So it's somewhat arbitrary. That's what I mean, is that we use discretion and we said, okay, well, that seems reasonable to us. So we think that that would constitute being in compliance with, they could circumvent hauling water, and it seemed to make sense.
But they could still have a shortfall. I mean,
They could.
3 months is only
Yeah, they
3
could.
months, so.
Right.
I think that's vetting all of the issues in the staff report, so I think that brings us to public comment. We're going to do one public comment for everything we've talked about. I would first like to invite the appellant to come up and talk, and then the applicant if he chooses, and then we'll open it up to the 3-minute public comment period.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Steve Roadhouse, and I want to make it right off the bat how imperative it is that you realize this isn't just for me. I don't have a personal grudge against these guys. It's for a community which is a very highly densely populated area, including Bear Creek, Fresh Creek Estates, our First Left Road, and up around Trinity Dam Boulevard. So, in relation to the staff report, and in relation to the comments that Mary Beth has made, she mentioned that the zoning is unclassified. I've been here for 40 years. I've done 3 minor subdivisions. I've built houses on those subdivisions, and it's always been referred to by planning as rural residential. Maybe that just stuck in my head, and there's another place in the ordinance or the law or wherever it's written that claims it's that. Another thing in relation to the hoop houses, it says here in the staff report that there are 2 that have been permitted. There's actually 3 that I can see from the house, from driving to and from. As far as relating to the well test, the 4 hours required to adequately assess the viable nature of how much water is coming out over that period of time cannot in any way be determined if somebody shows up in the final hour and a half to 3 wells at the same time and say they're compliant. Now, it may be that the well driller said, this is what that does and that's what that does, and a lot of times people commend themselves by themselves, so their accuracy is something that I yet question. The volume is what you guys have been talking to. As we go over to the next page, it talks about how much that the 3 gallons per minute applies. And then it says the applicant has reported that he has rehauled the water subsequent, subject parcel supplement to the volume. And it's an interesting thing, you talked about increasing the water storage, having those 55,000 gallons there. Those tanks are already there. They're on site. So, it's an interesting thing. We're finally given the opportunity to appeal this, yet the decision's already been made. I mean, that's kind of like putting the cart before the horse. What's the commission for? If all these things are already done before the appeal's even heard. And then calling 55,000 gallons emergency or domestic, it just doesn't, you think about how using fabricated words as a cloak for deception is all part of this. When you go up there and you look at that thing, there is a multitude, a major amount. So it's not so much just 55,000 gallons just for domestic or fire. This thing is growing. Now they have the opportunity, since they didn't abide by the law of hauling water in the beginning, now they have the opportunity to fill up even more water and increase their greenhouses, which were hoop houses in the originally, and they've been there for 4 years. They may have changed it, they've never gone away visually. So it's a real conundrum for you guys, to be sure, because there's so much new information. But if the law's the law, and this is the only vehicle that we have, the community, to say something about this, in a highly density populated area, I need to say something. I'm just the voice, right? It's not just me, like I said. There's also things I don't know if you got in your packet. I don't know when you get it, and I brought extras, pictures, showing, the pipe, the 2-inch PVC pipe that goes up to the tank from the road. If you're interested in even looking at it, I have.
Are these the pictures in the packet?
And there was one photo that you had mentioned. You're talking about a photo of a PVC pipe that goes from Trinity Dam Boulevard.
No, from the road, first left road, up to the tank. There's a couple of them. I don't know if they've been around, and I certainly will give them to you here. So it's not hearsay. But I don't know if that was included in your pictures.
Yeah, the pictures are off the packet. So we can pass those around.
Yeah, you can pass them around. So to keep it succinct here, because the well test has not been currently proven, the required 4 hours to make sure it's doing what it says it's going to do, nor has it in the past operated, have they operated illegally. The license should not be considered in good standing with the county or with the community, and the license should be denied. And again, it's not me. I bet you I have already 70 signatures. We don't want it in our community. So, thank you for your time very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rojas. Is it Mr. Cook?
Yes, sir.
Would you care to?
Yes, I wouldn't mind saying a few things. Just to start off, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, both sides of the room. Really not sure where to start, but I will say, as far as the greenhouses, I'll address that situation first. Can anyone hear me okay? Okay. I have all 3 permits here, which are issued by the county, obviously. We've had them since the greenhouses were constructed. They're engineered, they're permanent structures, so I can dispel that. As far as water storage goes, yes, we've had to haul in the past. We've tried to fix that problem, obviously, by adding more storage, 55,000 gallons. 5,000 of that is separate. and dedicated specifically for emergencies, never used for domestic or cultivation. In our case, the 55,000 gallons of storage is, because of the way our water system works, used for domestic and also our vegetable gardens. We grow lots of our own food to share with our neighbors if they would like it. And also for cultivation, and it's also shared with another neighbor. So, you know, to mitigate water usage, obviously add more storage, pump as much as we can during the winter. We drilled the new well at our expense, added the tanks at our expense, everything permitted, obviously, because we know with 10,000 square feet of canopy, how much water usage we will need. We've documented it for 2 years already, and we feel very confident that with our well production tests, our storage, that no more water hauling will occur, and that we will be fine through the season. And especially next year where we can add more storage if necessary, and continue. I want to bring a few things to the attention. I noticed in this packet, there were letters written on our behalf that weren't included in here, one of them being from our neighbors, another one from the Downriver Consulting, sorry. I didn't see them included in the packet. I just wasn't sure if you guys received that.
No, they're not.
I have a copy here if you'd like it.
Will you please provide a copy as well over here?
This is from our direct neighbors. I'm not sure if the Downriver Consulting one was received either.
I didn't see. No, we didn't get those.
Were they provided via email?
I believe this one was mailed in or email. That was emailed? Yes, and I'm not sure about Downriver Consulting. Which one do you know? I'm not sure.
I think Marie did.
It would have been Marie. I talked to her last week. I'm not sure if she mailed it or emailed it.
Okay.
Was it the wrong email address?
Could you pass it?
No, we're down some staff members and trying to make sure that we're
Cool.
getting all the correspondence that's coming in.
Absolutely. I just wanted to make sure that the Planning Commission had a chance to read those, since they're in our favor, obviously. I'm not sure if there's any other questions I could answer for you, but I'm happy to, if you have anything for me.
It is your intent to not do any hauling? Water hauling?
Absolutely. Hence, you know, over $50,000 we've invested in our water system thus far, especially mostly since last summer, knowing that this would become an issue, and we're trying to correct it.
And between the ongoing production of the wells and the 55,000 gallons, or the 50,000 gallons,
Yep.
you can support your cultivation of the cannabis, plus your vegetable garden and other domestic use.
And domestic and shared with our neighbor. I'm absolutely confident in that, yes.
And what's shared with your neighbor?
Our lower well is deeded as
Ah,
50%
well, okay.
shared, yeah.
Got it.
And even if need be, we could drill a fourth well. I don't think we need it, but it could be done.
Thank you. Any other questions of the gentleman? Okay, thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Now it's public comment, 3 minutes. Anyone would care to address the issue?
Hi, Commissioners. Dave Valdez, of the city. On the water issue, because it's all about water here. I have a 3-gallon per minute well. I also have a hand dug well supported by a pre-1914 water right from Reddings Creek. Unfortunately, Redding Creek goes dry. When it goes dry, guess what happens? I no longer have water in my hand dug well that used to support 3 homes. And my 120-foot water well that is on, by the way, there aren't puddles that you get and then they run dry. These courses are pipelines from Mount Shasta, let's call it. The highest point where the snow level drips. It comes down chutes and it comes into fissures in rocks. It can be this wide, it can be that wide. If it's this wide, you're getting 1.5, 3 gallons per minute. Almost any well witcher that my father was the best, never missed, was in 5 feet if anything, taught me a lot about hydrology. And I learned through education more. Those wells, he would only witch in late October and September, because if there was water there, there would always be water. Those wells that are tested in April, that is not a sufficient test. I can testify, having worked with the 3-gallon per minute system with an apple orchard, etc., 50,000 gallons would go in less than a month. I can spend 5,000 gallons in 4 hours just trying to get my 40 apple trees watered. And the apples will dry up. It takes a lot more than that. In addition, there's no way in God's green earth that I can take a 3 gallon per minute that goes down to 1.5 in July and August and fill up a 5,000 water tank. It would take me 2 or 3 days, and I would use that up domestically, and I would have a dried up backyard. There would be no vegetable garden. Guess what? I haven't had a vegetable garden in a couple of years for that reason. Water ran out in Reddings Creek on July 13th last year, and that's what happens, folks. You guys all know it. That the supply of water at the end of April is no test at all in this county, especially when you're sitting in those dinky little water wells that he has. In addition, he doesn't have the 3 gallons per minute. He doesn't meet that because one of those wells is shared, plus the tanks are shared. His neighbor can take what he wants when he wants. I don't know what the sharing is, 50% is 50%. I've been through the sharing, as I mentioned. It's hell on earth to try to get 3 households and 3 yards and 3 vegetable gardens off a dinky little well. So, you know, my 3 minutes are up, but as far as the water issue is concerned, it can't possibly work with 55,000 or any other amount because it'll be used and dried up long before he's finished gardening.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carol Fensel, and I live on First Left Road. We have to drive past their grow every time we leave. They've got cameras in their trees, and they have the plants. You know how it smells. They have the greenhouses, as you now call them, but they're also growing right next to the road. I also have property in Rush Creek Estates, 39 separate lots on that in that neighborhood that have a water community, a water district. They have their own water, and in the summertime, we are on conservation. How are they going to be on conservation? Has there been an environmental impact study on what their wells and their drawing is going to do to everybody downriver that is relying on that water for domestic use? In 2015, they started growing, and I have the Know Before You Grow that was put out in 2015. We know for a fact that they were in violation of 3 of them, and it's in the packet. I don't have a list of all the rules for all the other years, but since they were hauling water, we know that they are pushing the limits of what's allowable. In Resolution 2016-077, there was 4 adopted principles concerning cannabis. One of them was for a safe place for all residents to live, work, and enjoy retirement and raise their families without detriment to neighbors or communities. They know that their activity is dangerous. That's why they have cameras in the trees, padlocks on the gate, and warning signs on the trees. Our grandchildren won't even be able to walk to the bus stop because they have to walk past this commercial grow that attracts crime and trimagants, and they have dogs. There's a law against having a large commercial grow next to a bus stop. Why isn't there any consideration for the kids that have to walk past these grows to get to their bus stop? We now have 2 large grows in our neighborhood. Rush Creek Estates, as I said, is 39 lots that are a single acre in size, surrounded by these larger parcels. How many grows are we going to allow to surround Rush Creek Estates? We are a small neighborhood, even though it's zoned rural residential, there's a lot of people. We're all impacted by their activity, the smell, the potential for crime, and the water diversion. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, Veronica Kelly Albies, Douglas City. I want to say good evening and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. Not all things are created equal. You create the general rules so that they may be applied. However, not every parcel that makes an application has the environmental fortitude to appropriately support their commercial endeavor. Environmental issues are not always created by a commercial grower. Sometimes they are just created by the environment. Commercial growers are not always the bad guys in this licensing process. However, Water, odor, and soil issues have cumulative effects on neighbors and neighborhoods that should not be glossed over with a categorical exemption when not appropriate. This particular parcel has 3 wells that barely put together meet the minimum standards. One of the wells has 50-50 ownership, so how are we going to measure that? They get 0.815, whatever was in the report. Who's measuring that? What if they're using the 1.64 that it produces? There's just no way to measure those water usages. What if during the dry summer months these low-producing wells go dry? How do these low numbers not trigger CEQA research? The applicant has a history of hauling water in. He just said they knew it would be an issue, so that's why they started ordering tanks. So they knew they were out of compliance before. So enforcement is my main thing too. And the compliance officer that works normal business hours, 8 to 5, 9 to 5, is the one that's going out there to check on them. And are these tanks separate? We've kind of already gone over that. But the Scouts honor system for answering questions, hey, are you in compliance? Because they're not there after hours. And most of this non-compliant stuff is happening after hours. And the staff recommendation to store 55,000 gallons of water from these low-producing wells seems to suggest that CEQA water source research should be triggered. In the last 7 days, the applicant widened a dirt road to bring up the additional tanks. Does that not trigger road impacts for CEQA review? Private roadways that have native material surfaces may be prone to creating fugitive dust and/or surface erosion. This particular parcel is a bit unique because First Left Road doesn't just go by it, it goes through it. And thus forces the neighbors and neighborhood to come in direct contact with whatever commercial activities and their extended possible environmental issues or public nuisances that are created on the parcel. The public nuisance of odor is a factor for the neighborhood as well, yet no CEQA review. I don't know the applicant, but I have seen many commercial growers at these meetings speak of all they do to stay in compliance, and I support those that have risen to the challenge of meeting or exceeding ordinance requirements, have done the CEQA work to make sure their investment meets and or exceeds the environmental needs without causing harm, and empathetic to neighbors and neighborhoods. Who's in charge of enforcement? If the public could see consequences of those out of compliance, there might be less distrust and a way for neighbors to continue to work and live together. Give the entire public, growers and non-growers, confidence in the processes laid out. Somewhere in the planning department, there seems to be a Bermuda Triangle where complaints just disappear. Not all square pegs can fit in the round hole, and the current climate of just trying to hammer them in will only continue to cause splintering of all communities, neighborhoods in this county. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Before you start the clock, I'd like to respond to Mr. Matthews' question about metering between a house and a irrigation system. I'm a retired contractor, and I can tell you that the California Business Code requires a backflow prevention device from irrigation going into the domestic water, period. If you're going to have them connected, you're not going to have it flowing both ways. No way. To pick up where I left off, I'm a resident of the neighborhood in question, and our mountainside is proven to contain sparse underground water resources. Their fractured rock, typical well has a recovery rate of 10 to 15 gallons per hour, not minute. And you're lucky if you have a well 400 feet deep that accumulates 400 gallons a day. And that's all of us, our whole neighborhood, that's a fact. There was a parcel at 211 Go Away right next to me that the same well driller that testified to their well report, Lincoln, he certified their wells at 5.5 gallons per minute. Turned out, when Jeff Dickey made a surprise inspection, the 2 wells weren't even hooked up with pumps, hoses, or anything else. When I was reporting, and I still have the records of it, to Leslie Hubbard last summer, this grower was importing 40,000 gallons in a month between the end of May and the first part of July that I reported to her, that was witnessed and photographed. And that still wasn't enough. And that was a 10,000 square foot canopy plus plants all over the hillside that he had going on. So what I'm saying is, if you do the math, 3 gallons a minute is 4,320 gallons a day of water, okay? Now, 55,000 gallons in a storage tank is not enough for CAL FIRE, domestic use, a vegetable garden, and a 10,000 foot canopy. There just is no way. So I would strongly suggest that, as Steve Roadhouse has requested, that there be a certified 4-hour well test with a county representative there for the 4 hours per well. And that will give you a truly accurate test before issuing or renewing a permit. And if it proves out, then there should never, ever again be any reason for importing water. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Jim Taylor. I live on Trinity Dam Boulevard below that. And this is the first time when Steve came to me, I was even notified that there's a problem. I have one well, which I, in my house, I have 7 acres, and that's all I do. My concern is this person drill wells, how much water is he taking away from me? You know, I have no recourse. Drill another well like him. And in that case, I have no idea how long my household is going to last. I've been there for almost 20 years. And I'm really kind of upset because I'm more than 1,000 feet, but yet he has an impact on me. And I wasn't even notified. I get nothing in the mail or nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
My name's Buzz Sheringhausen. I'm a licensed cultivator in California. I want to start this by saying there is a principle, which is a bar against all information, a defense against all argument, which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. I came in here under one thought. And if I offended you in any way when we talked, I apologize, because I had contempt prior to investigation. I came in here under one mindset. I'm going to defend the honor of the growers. I came in here to pull out my 7:43 in the morning, my state annual license, and talk about the lengths we go to, the money we spent, the effort that we put into this, the immense amount. Commend Leslie and the planning department, commend the building department, because it all belongs to them. I came in here to beat the table, talk about how we're cleaning up Trinity County, making stream bed alteration agreements, and everything else. But having listened to Steve, having read this, there is no longer contempt prior to investigation. It makes me grateful for a few things. One, I have county water meters, the only cultivator that have county water meters. That has nothing to do with this specific situation. So that leaves me purely now to defend the honor of Jimmy. Jimmy's my friend. I'm glad I don't have your job because I don't have to make this decision. Jimmy's been my friend for 7 years. Jimmy's an honorable man. He has helped me out significantly through the course of that time. And I came in here in one direction, and I've changed my whole mindset. These people have a valid point. They have a valid point. Everyone here has a valid point. Fortunately, I don't have to make that decision. And again, for what it's worth, and I really don't know what it's worth at this point in time, Jimmy's easy to get along with. Jimmy's an honorable man. If it's conceivable, you tell Jimmy what you need, Jimmy will go to great lengths to do it. And I don't know if that's even, and because believe me, I understand your point 100%. Okay, dollars and everything.
Sir.
The girls, so that's it.
Please
I'm
address
done.
it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
My name is Suzanne Wood. I live on Trinity Dam Boulevard, below Steve Roadhouse as well. And in looking through the report, I did notice that there are 3 wells with a recorded 1.94, the second one was 0.61, and the third is 1.63. So 3 wells were drilled. We have a place that has 1 well, and 3 gallons is barely enough to keep you going from day to day. If you have a lot of people that come in to take a shower, for instance, you end up, you need to space the showers out, or you have to have a small holding tank. So keep in mind when you make the decision that if there are 3 wells that were drilled, and this is what the outcome is, it's very, very small.
Thank you.
John Latin, Douglas City. Full disclosure, I do know Carol and Steve and consider them friends. I don't know you folks, but nice to meet you.
You as well.
Be better under other circumstances. I question the application of a categorical exemption, which is really the starting point, it seems to me, like in the planning process. What exemption from what? Well, it's just an exemption from a more systematic, CEQA-based review and evaluation of the project. And it may well be that if that more detailed examination were made, then the license should issue. But it doesn't make sense to me to say that this project is categorically exempt based on existing facilities for 2 primary reasons. One is the reading of existing facilities in the regulations of CDFA. Any common sense reading of existing facilities makes it clear, I think, that it's talking about buildings and physical things on a property. If they aren't modified much, then there's a categorical exemption. If there's just a minor modification, or if there's a repair. The extension of that to agricultural activities, farming on the land, surprises me, because that's not really the way the exemption reads. Now, I know it's a non-exclusive list, and I know planning, or rather, Cannabis Division has referred to some new document from CDFA that further explains this. But just going on a common sense reading of existing facilities, it doesn't make sense to me to apply it to an agricultural endeavor. And the other reason that the CE shouldn't apply is that the categorical exemption for existing facilities presupposes that what's going on has already been examined and is CEQA compliant in the first place. And there has been evidently no prior CEQA evaluation and review. What the conclusion is saying is that this project is exempt because something was done before which was not exempt and was not run through a CEQA evaluation, but we'll just grandfather it in and say, oh, it's the same, so therefore a categorical exemption applies. That's not logical to me. And I submit that you should think about that.
Thank you, sir.
Paul Hooser, Rush Creek Estates. I'm also on the list that Carol mentioned. I don't think we need this commercial activity in our residential area. Most folks have already made the points that I wanted to make, but John maybe ran out of a little time. I completely agree with his rationale on this CE, that the foundation for it is flawed. And in addition, this idea that folks could have objected to the activity before, the problem with that is that the county has kept records of these locations and licenses secret. There's been no public review of that, so the opportunity to even challenge it prior to using it as a foundation for a CE for a renewal didn't exist. So this idea that the statute of limitations ran out, you should have challenged it before, should not hold, because there was no opportunity. There was no public record of this, if you will. The water issue, I think, is critical. Mr. Matthews hit on it originally. It seems quite obvious that the wells are not adequate. Otherwise, why would they purchase 55,000 gallons of storage? If you carry that same math out that Tom mentioned, that's 130,000 gallons a day, if it could, which is obviously absurd in July or August or September. If they were adequate, why would you purchase 55,000 gallons of storage? You wouldn't, because your wells would be well more than adequate to supply the water you need. Thanks.
Thanks, sir.
That it? You sure? Oh, I didn't clear people.
Good evening, Commissioners. John Brower from Junction City. And a few things to touch on. One is that there's really only a couple questions to be answered here. One is, did the applicant prove sufficient water for this permit type in the eyes of the lead agency at this point, at this time the county? And they proved that with a certified licensed well driller, highly respected in the community, was observed for the last portion of the testing that really matters by county staff. They signed off on it. The applicant is adding big storage and has plans for more. I visited the site today, and they have plans to install 4 more tanks as soon as they can. As far as the commingling of residential and commercial cannabis water, the state water board order that most cultivators have to transition over to this year specifies that if they must be separately metered and reported. The applicant's, of course, going to do that too as he transitions from North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board to State Water Board cannabis order. And it seems like there's 2 questions to answer here. One was the unpermitted hoop houses. That question's been answered. Staff feels that staff has inspected. There are no unpermitted buildings on the property. The applicant has jumped through all the hoops necessary to permit them. The other question is water, and that's been answered. This is really a very simple matter. The applicant expressed to me today a desire to work with the neighborhood in Trinity County for over 10 years, respected member of the community, and it sounds like he's offered to engage with the neighborhood, and at times it's gone well, and at times there's been anger and fear. But the site is a tight operation, spick and span clean. They produce an awful lot of food on site with those existing water sources, in addition to their domestic and commercial needs. I encourage approval of this project and denial of the appeal. We have over 5,000 commercial scale grows in this county. This is one of the brave few that have really taken a leap of faith and self-registered into this shaky program that state licensing didn't even exist when they started. And I encourage approval of this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay.
Hi, I'm Gene Johnson from Douglas City. It seems like the problem is with this complaint is that these folks don't want marijuana in their area. Now, the 10 years or 12 years I've been going to the cannabis meetings every Thursday or whatever it was, you know, it's discussed over and over and over, up to midnight, whatever. And now, since my friend, I call my friend, James, he's very honorable, I've known him for 10 years. He's willing to work with anybody, I can tell you that. And I wish they could work together, that we wouldn't be here right now. But evidently they aren't. But anyway, you know, if you're going to blame somebody, let's blame the county. They don't want to give him the license. He paid all the fees.
Sir, please address the commission.
Yeah, blame the county. They, you know, you did everything right, and they okayed it. You know, there's going to be marijuana farms in Trinity County. There has been since the 60s. And it's still going to continue on, I'm sure. I got 12 gardens around my house. They don't affect me. I just go talk to them if they do. And that's all I got.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, last call. All right, we'll close public comment then, bring it back to the commission. Commissioners, I recommend that we continue the earlier model, and let's first deal with the question that the staff raised, the principle of hauling water versus cultivation water. First one to that section 060 of the ordinance. I think the issue, let's see, let's go back to the staff report. The issue was framed as if there's going to be any water hauling, it has to be separately, it has to be isolated from any cultivation. So, water hauling can be used for things, any of the other things we talked about, fire, vegetable gardens, domestic. The cultivation has to be separate, separately metered, separately stored, and can't be hauled. It has to be produced on site, either through surface water according to all the surface water rules, or through wells. I think that's, is that where we ended up? Am I framing the issue? What do you think?
Well, if the state is saying that, isn't it effective in a year? Or is
It's transitioning over the course of the year.
That domestic and cultivation use of water has to be separate and separately metered, then it seems to me that that's what we should be doing. And not just saying you have to increase storage.
Right, there was a comment about the bulk storage is shared, and I think we can't do that anymore.
No.
I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, actually what Leslie was saying was that they wanted to allow bulk storage. So, but that meant that they could not haul water for either domestic or cultivation because it's bulk storage. But if the state is saying that it has to be separate, then that solves the whole problem.
Mr. Commissioner, I think the only separation, in reviewing the code from the state, I don't think it talks about storage, I think it talks about metering.
Right, exactly.
So the storage can be, from my understanding, the storage can be bulk, but the meter as to what's being fed to the commercial cannabis has to be separately metered, not the source.
Do we care if it's bulk or not? The issue is, what is the source of the water for cultivation? It must be on site, either from wells or from diversions. Diversions drives you to have storage, because that's the rule, for summertime. Wells may also drive you to have storage if they're inadequate to be irrigating in real time year round, or in season. But the bulk storage, I think, is not our issue. I think it's that the system has to be designed, however it works, so that domestic water cannot find its way into the cultivation system if the domestic water is hauled.
Exactly.
And under domestic, I'm throwing in fire and gardens, vegetable gardens. Would we agree with that? I don't want to make a motion.
Yeah. Okay.
You're the water guy.
You want to do it? Go ahead, Brian.
You started?
Okay, and then you can finish. I move that we recommend to the planning department that water storage, if in bulk, can only, cannot ever have any the water delivery. If there is the possibility of needing to have water delivered, then the water for uses other than cultivation has to be separate, so that cultivation water is metered separately from that for domestic use. Did that make any sense at all?
The water board already takes care of it.
That was a little tortured.
That was a little tortured. I think Graham should have done it.
Shall we have Bella read it back?
I'll read that.
I feel like I understand what you said though.
Can I make a recommendation? I think what the commissioner is saying is, if you have the ability to transport water, then you have to have segregated tanks, which are for domestic use only. If you're using bulk storage, no delivery is acceptable.
That's exactly what I was saying. May not have sounded like it. That was it.
Is that your motion?
Yes.
I have a question, maybe it's a point of order, is, are they gonna be changing the ordinance on this? Because the ordinance is clear.
That's not the point of order.
Deliveries can only be used in emergencies.
Oh, well, I'll check everything on here.
All right. Who wrote it down? Val, can you get that one? What he said?
If there is a possibility that you will haul water for domestic purposes, water storage shall be kept separate for domestic use and commercial cannabis.
Can I amend that to add though, that water delivery, water transportation should be allowed for emergency situations such as power outages, long-term power outages.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think that's already contained within the ordinance.
Okay, okay. I didn't know if we needed to include here.
All right, so we, any discussion about the motion? You all understand the motion? We good? This is just a recommendation of staff, so we will just do a simple vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Carries unanimously. You good?
Good.
Let's take up the second portion of the item, which is the appeal. I think there's three elements to it. There's the secret question, there's the permit of the greenhouse question, and there's the water hauling question. Commissioners?
Do we need a motion first in order to discuss?
Well, it sounds to me like the commissioner, I've broken this up into three sections. If that's the case, then we would take it in three separate parts. It should start with a motion and a second to enter into the discussion.
I'm not, it's one appeal, it's one motion. Right, where are you gonna uphold the appeal or not?
You can handle it that way.
That's the way I understand it.
I was just taking from the way that it was stated that you were seeing those three separate. So
No, I see there's three elements of the decision, that's what I'm thinking.
Understood.
Those are the three topics that we discussed, and, but I believe it's one appeal, we're either gonna uphold the appeal or not, you don't uphold half the appeal, so. Let's take the easy one, the greenhouses. Sounds like there's a non-issue here, it sounds like there's three buildings, three permits.
Exactly.
Is that, you confirming that, staff? The buildings in question are permitted structures. Is that a yes?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, will you please repeat that?
The greenhouses in question are permanent structures.
Correct.
And were at the time of the issuance of the license.
Correct.
Okay, so that sounds like that's an easy one. Let's do the water issue, the water hauling. Your recommendation, should we approve it, is simply that we tack on a condition to increase storage. You've decided 55,000 gallons is adequate based on your math. Okay, so commissioners, what are your thoughts about the water situation? Remember, the context is what we just recommended regarding interpretation of the ordinance.
I personally would like to, increasing the water storage I think is fine, but I think it would be a good idea to separate the domestic from the cultivation.
Okay.
I'm not completely convinced that 55,000 gallons of storage is really enough, but it's what staff, in consultation with the applicant, has decided is adequate, and there won't be any chance of water hauling being necessary.
Did you say that the systems are separated?
That's what I would prefer is to see the system
If
separate.
there's going to be
The possibility.
possibility of hauling, then they should be separate systems,
Yes.
not a single
Yes,
bulk storage.
exactly.
That's your thought, okay. Does that meet what you're saying?
It's certainly better.
I don't see that it would really stop hauling for the commercial cannabis, unless the tanks were completely separated, and they're separately metered. You could haul, if you wanted to pay the money, you could bring in potable water for your domestic use and send it through the meter for your commercial cannabis. I also have some concern about the 3 gallon a minute well test producing enough water, even with 50,000 gallons of storage. It'd take 38 days to fill the tanks. If you ever ran out late in the season, you won't catch up. There's some issues with the amount of water. I mean, that's a lot of water storage, but it's going to take a long time to recover if it's used. It's one of the issues I have with just storage.
One of the things that staff said was that they looked at the record of the amount of water used for the cultivation by the applicant, by the applicant? Yes, thank you, by the applicant. That was reported to the state, and that amount was 15,000.
The highest month
Was 15,000.
was 15,000.
And so that seems to me that this would be adequate, especially if they separated their cultivation from their domestic use, because then if their domestic use ran out, they could, and if they're separately metered and they're separate systems, then it would be very difficult, well, maybe not very difficult, but maybe I'm more trusting, but I don't think he's gonna be dumping water into his domestic system and then diverting it to his cultivation.
I would like to add something to this discussion. In light of the motion that was recently presented, that no delivery shall be acceptable, is if the system is bulk, it would be obviously in that case in the applicant's best interest prior to the installation of the many tanks he has available to separate the system. So if he would be required to get delivery for his domestic use, well, then he would have that option. So to add this as a further condition to add this as a further condition to the 55,000 gallons that he's going to install, I think it's unnecessary. Also, in several comments of the 1.5 hours that Inspector Christy Anderson was out there to attest to the delivery, Synonymous example would be in a construction site. The inspector isn't there 24/7. Well, every single nail is being banged into a wall. They show up, they do the inspection, they leave, they show up to the time they deem necessary to assess the continuation or the proper construction of that site. Same condition applies. Christie was there for an hour and a half out of a 4-hour test done by a licensed contractor with liability due to the state. I think that suffices, in my opinion, to the test produced here. So I'm in favor of just to adhere to staff recommendation of the 55,000 gallons of storage. That's it.
I'm sorry, I kind of lost you for a second there, but were you recommending that they have adding a condition or not adding a condition?
I'm in favor of not adding a condition. It would be in the applicant's best interest to add that separate system if he wants to get, in light of the motion we did earlier, if he wants to get water delivered, yes, then he should have a separate system. So for us to add that addition to this condition, I don't see it necessary.
That makes sense.
All right, I wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Y'all good on water? Let's talk about CEQA for a moment. Anyone have any comments on what we heard about it being a class 1 CE? Basis for that, and that whole discussion, what are your thoughts on that? Is that adequate, appropriate?
Was that was not mentioned in the appeal, was it? So I don't know that we need to address it because it's not part of the appeal.
I don't think we need to, but I think we can. It's listed under the purpose of the hearing. The purpose of the hearing is an appeal of a planning director's decision to issue a Trinity County commercial cannabis license and a class 1 categorical exemption.
Yeah, but he did not appeal that part of it.
That's a fact.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think the logic test that was referred to in our testimony, that if you obtain a permit in 1 year and have existing facilities that really don't go through any kind of environmental review, and then use that as the basis for a categorical exemption in your renewal, that could be a problem. I mean, we're in the middle of a process that is changing, obviously. It's changed this year significantly from what it has been in the past. So I totally understand that there's some growing pains here or whatever, but I mean, just if you look at that flow chart and think about it, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Okay.
I do agree with Commissioner Matthews, and it was very interesting, the comment that Mr. John Letton made as well, and it does make sense. How do you base something that has not been properly, thoroughly gone through, basically through a CEQA process? But however, are we in the position here today to change that? I mean, as we all know, the county is in a lawsuit currently too, and with new state regs coming out, pending the outcome of the lawsuit, I mean, the process might be entirely changed. So do we need to discuss that or make further provisions based on that? And
I would ask if you're going to wade heavily into this territory that we get your CEQA counsel.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Yes. Yeah, I go back to the fact that that was not part of his appeal, and I don't think that we can discuss it all we want, but it's not part of his appeal.
I agree.
I think that's the case. If you're going to go into a CEQA discussion,
The interesting thing is, I believe that this is the first time we've had an opportunity to talk about this. Right? 300 of these things have been issued, and this is the first time the commission's had a chance to weigh in on our view, and that's our bailiwick, of application of CEQA to discretionary actions in the county. So it's an interesting opportunity to give guidance to the county on it, at least to have a discussion. And in the end, I guess we have to take council's lead on whether we can consider that as part of the appeal or not. But there's some very interesting nuances to this. And, you know, my personal belief is I agree with Commissioner Matthews that picking CEs out of the air for where there's no initial study on which to say the basis is there's no change is
Mr. Commissioner, I would like to stop you. We're wading into the territory, and so I'm happy to get your counsel on the phone. But I'm going to ask that you be on the phone before we go any further.
So commissioners, do you want to entertain this discussion, or I don't want to do this if this is not the will of the commission?
Quite frankly, I trust what the planning department does, and I trust their judgment.
I don't think we need to talk about it tonight. That's part of this appeal.
Fair enough. We'll talk about other matters. Very well then. Okay. Then we need a motion. This would be a good time.
Okay. I move that the planning commission deny the appeal, finding the following. The commercial cannabis cultivation site located on APN 010-680-07 at 185 First Left Road, Weaver, is it Weaverville or Lewiston?
Weaverville.
Okay, Weaverville is operating in compliance with Trinity County Zoning Code Section 17.43. And B, water storage on the site shall be increased to 55,000 gallons to provide adequate volume for domestic and commercial cannabis cultivation use and avoid the need for any water hauling unless for emergencies as defined in County Code 17.43.060C.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we have any discussion about the motion? The motion is to deny the appeal with these conditions, with these findings. Is this a roll call? Let's do a roll call.
Diana Stewart,
Aye.
Dan Frazier,
No.
Mike McHugh,
No?
Graham Matthews,
Aye.
Richard Ward.
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries 3-2, and the appeal is denied. Thank you all for an interesting discussion. It was.
All get along.
That brings us to, please, well, let's take a moment. If you're going to leave, please do so briskly. We have to continue the meeting. Matters for the commission. From the commission. Matters from the commission, sorry.
I will not be here for the meeting on the 23rd.
And there is a meeting on the 23rd? Okay. Anything else? I don't know where to go with this CEQA thing. It's a little late in the game. It's unfortunate that the staff didn't bring it to the commission early in the game on to weigh in on the CEQA, the application of this discretionary CEQA decision being used in each of these grows. We are 200 into them, so, and I'm sure council weighed in on that, but I'm not sure we would have agreed with everything council's taken on, so I'm not sure what to do. I'm not sure I can meet each of the agendas bringing it at this point. Pending the imminent EIR and all that other stuff that's about to change. It is unfortunate. Anything else? Schedules? I'm gonna miss one in June. Do you wanna go that far out?
Sorry.
We'll miss one of the meetings in June if we're going that far out. Okay. I think I told you last time. June. We'll miss the one on the 14th. 13th. Yeah, Thursday, 13th. Okay, then matters from staff.
Just to let you know, we are short-staffed right now. We've had some people that have been out for at least a month out of cannabis. And so if your constituents approach you and say, hey, I'm not getting any response back, in particular with cannabis projects, that's why. With planning, we're pretty lean as well. We're trying to figure out how to handle it. But if your constituents have an issue and they feel like they're not getting a timely response, we'll do our best to respond. But to let you know, that's what's happening right now. We have reflown the senior/associate level planner position, and hopefully we'll get some qualified applicants.
Any hints on the director position? Anything going on?
Oh,
You haven't heard?
no,
Is that it?
that's it for now.
Anything else? Then I think we're adjourned at 8:52. Thank you all.
Thank you.